My story is not about luck or a fairy tale. It's about hard work, about my family's sacrifices and determination, my dad's huge support for me, and many other people's belief and kindness. I found I had a talent, and I have worked as hard as possible to develop it so that I can be successful, and in the process inspire others, if I can, to achieve a dream. This is an excerpt from the book we're going to talk about today, Lewis Hamilton, My Story by Lewis Hamilton.
Welcome to Performers, the podcast that takes you into the minds of the world's most extraordinary athletes, coaches, and performers. We're your hosts. I'm Dr. Greg Young, and you've just heard, of course, from Dr. Duncan Simpson. As sports psychology experts, we'll guide you through the pages of their autobiographies, revealing the mindsets, strategies, and habits that propelled the world's best to the absolute pinnacle of their fields. Our goal, of course, is to help you learn from history's greatest performers. For each episode, we read and then condense entire autobiographies into concentrated insights representing over 20 hours of work per episode. You gain not only the collective wisdom of these elite performers, but also access to over 30 years of our professional expertise in sports psychology. So, listening to this, you're saving countless hours while accessing the distilled wisdom and proven strategies of the best in their fields. Of course, these episodes take a huge amount of time and care to create, and we've been incredibly grateful for the support we've already received from some of you. If you found value in what we're sharing and want to help us keep it going, you can support the show by clicking the donate link in the show notes. Every little bit helps us continue to bring you the stories that inspire and challenge. So, Duncan, tell us a little bit about Lewis Hamilton and this book today.
Lewis Hamilton is a 7-time F1 world champion, and that is tied most all time with Michael Schumacher. He has 105 Grand Prix wins, which is a record. He has the most pole positions at 104 and the most podium finishes at 202. In 2021, Lewis Hamilton was knighted for his services to motorsport and activism, thus becoming Sir Lewis Hamilton. His career earnings are estimated between 700 and 800 million, making him one of the highest earning athletes in history. Greg, we've said it before, and it's this concept of pick an example of extreme success and then ask what the hell happened here. And there are so many valuable lessons that we can learn from likely the greatest F1 driver of all time. The book itself was published in 2008 and covers Hamilton's journey from early karting to his initial kind of foray into F1. It goes up to his rookie season in 2007. Of course, a lot has happened since then, like 7 world championships, but I think the book does a really good job of telling us what it took to get him to the world stage.
That's quite a lot of accolades, and of course, he also has one of the nicest company cars you can possibly get.
Yes.
So, why don't we jump in?
So, Lewis Hamilton, a little bit of backstory. He was born on January 7th in 1985 in Stevenage, which is a post-war commuter town north of London. His father worked for British Rail and his mother worked for the local council. They lived in a council house, and Lewis grew up alongside his half-sisters, Samantha and Nicola. Though British born, his family's roots were Grenadian. His grandfather moved to the UK in the 1950s before returning to Grenada in the 1970s. So, a little bit about his parents, Greg. He says, "My mum Carmen and my dad Anthony divorced when I was 2, and I lived with my mum until I was 10. After that, I moved to live with my dad and stepmom Linda. My mum is a huge and important part of my life and has always been there in the background wishing me success from afar. My stepmom Linda has been amazing, and I think she's the best stepmom in the world. I was very emotionally attached to my dad, and I found it difficult only seeing him at the weekends. They were the greatest weekends. I would not have missed them for anything. But I remember when I was 10 that I liked living with my mum because she was the easier parent. You know, with parents, when you have an easy one and a more demanding one. Well, she was the easier one. I've been extremely lucky. Both my mum and Linda are incredibly considerate, very caring and generous. A huge part of my personality, the emotional side, comes from both my mums. Even though my dad always told me you have to be polite, that was already in my nature. I would say my stronger, more competitive side comes from my dad. My selfishness, my focus, my determination, my ability to put things out of my mind, that all comes from and has been driven by my dad." Greg, we often hear about our performers being products of their environment, but in this case, Lewis is actually a product of multiple environments.
Yeah, very interesting that. But what's powerful here is that he hasn't just had these or been exposed to these different influences. It's that he's been able to integrate and weave them together. You've got his mom and his stepmom, both emotionally attuned and very nurturing. And then you've got his dad, who's instilling that discipline, that drive, and almost sort of surgical focus, if you will. That's really strong performance development. Exposure to contrast creates depth. It's not necessarily someone who's built in a single mold. He's shaped by range, by certainly by emotional range, competitive range, just exposure to what sounds like really great humans. And he doesn't really resist the complexity that exists within his home life. He accepts it, and that's what elite performers do. They don't waste energy trying to reconcile every single contradiction. They channel it in a really positive and productive way. And the important thing to remember here is peak performance, it's not clean, it's layered. You want grit, you want grace on top of that. You want some edge, but you also want empathy. And I think for Lewis, he's a bit of a case study in terms of how you own that emotional architecture.
Yeah, I love that. Such variety in his upbringing. And a little bit more about his dad. He says, "My dad has been the main driving force for me. A lot of my friends didn't have their fathers around, but mine was always there. He taught me important values and has been committed to making sure I maximize my opportunities to have a better life than he had. My approach is do not waver, do not give up. My dad reminds me of that nearly every day. He's as relentless in his own way as I am in mine. We both believe in honesty, loyalty, and trust, and we both have a never say die attitude. He is my biggest supporter and a fantastic father, without whom I may not have even discovered my talent for racing. He's the reason I've been able to grow, not just as a driver, but as a person." Greg, you and I both know what it's like to work with athletes who have what I'd say is a pushy parent. What do you see in Lewis's relationship with his dad?
Yeah, I don't know if this is the classical pushy parent, but I think this is a parent that pushed, maybe an engine room parent. He's not just, Lewis isn't just saying that his dad sort of supported the dream. He's built it. He's almost fabricated, right? He's put all of the pieces in place. And the real win here is that pushiness, if you will, that doesn't fracture Lewis. It helps him to sort of forge who he is and where he wants to go because it comes along with values, honesty, loyalty, trust, and that doesn't necessarily just come from lectures from his dad, but from a lived example. So I think here's the take home: if you're a parent, a coach, or even an athlete, someone that's being pushed. Here's the question: is the pressure that you're feeling or the pressure that you're giving coming from love? Or is it from someone else's unfinished business? And there's a real difference there. It's a really important difference. One builds fuel, the other can burn bridges here.
Yeah, I love that, Greg. And it definitely comes from a place of love from his father. And his dad just played such a central role in his upbringing and his life. And a little bit about Lewis's mentality. He says, mental strength is so important. On the surface, I may look cool most of the time, but underneath it, I'm a very emotional person. I love being at home with my family. The equilibrium it gives me is huge. In Formula One, you've got to be a bit cold and selfish, but I find I can balance it all when I'm around them. There are loads of places to gain or lose energy. For me, problems are energy wasters, and my dad helps by absorbing a lot of that. Sometimes the issues are too big for me, so I'll call my mum or a friend, and then it's their problem. I've been racing since I was 8, and I've learnt what works for me. Keep your family close, appreciate the opportunity, and give 100%. That's what I believe in. Greg, I love the idea of energy wasters and mental offloading that he's doing here. We don't always talk about this side of mental strength. What do you see in Lewis's approach here?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, this, because most people, when they hear mental toughness, they think it means sort of pushing everything down or bottling it up or putting it in a vault. But for Lewis, he's running a high performance emotional logistics here. So he's not suppressing here. He's not bottling things up. What he's doing is he's filtering. He's deciding what he wants to keep a hold of, deciding what he wants to dump off to the side, deciding who his support system is and who he's going to call when he feels a little bit overloaded. And that definitely isn't weakness. That really is a system by design. Here's the best part of it: he doesn't romanticize that. He literally says sometimes it's too big for me to handle. And that for me is world-class self-awareness. So the takeaway here is don't waste fuel arguing with every single thought. Build your systems, build your filters, build yourself up with people who can take that call when you're at capacity and help share that load a little bit. Because focus isn't just what you pay attention to, it's also what you choose not to pay attention to.
I love that last line. What you choose not to pay attention to. So A little bit more about his family. Lewis has a half brother called Nicholas, who was born prematurely and later diagnosed with cerebral palsy. Despite mobility challenges that affect his whole body, Nick remains positive and rarely complains. Lewis has spoken about how his brother's strength and his attitude really continue to motivate him throughout his life, especially during really intense moments in Formula One. And he says, I often try and imagine myself in Nick's position. I don't think I'd be anywhere near as strong as him. There's just so much to admire. So, whatever I'm doing, I say to myself, if you think this is hard to do, then think again. Nick is my inspiration, and that helps me a lot. We've always had an intense bond as a family. I like to think my parents' home as a power station, a place to go and seek support, rest, and reassurance in the good things in life. Greg, Nick is just this really powerful motivator for Lewis, isn't he?
He really is. And what's beautiful here is that Nick, he doesn't just motivate Lewis because of some sort of abstract idea of inspiration. It's real. It's grounded. It's their relationship. It's someone he's grown up with, someone he's watched fight through some challenges and some adversity that, to be honest, most of us will never experience. And doing that without complaining. And it's almost like Lewis has this internal, it's kind of like that big, that big red button that you can buy. It's like a perspective reset button. And Nick sort of serves of that. So the takeaway for performance here is, what's your anchor? Not just a hype source, something that provides fuel to the fire, but something or someone that quietly reminds you what matters, what's important to you. It helps to keep you humble, it helps to keep you hungry, and it helps to keep you focused when everything around you in the world feels really chaotic. And also, I love that he calls his home his power station. That's not just poetic, that's really, really apt. You've got to know where to plug in and recharge.
Yeah, I love those two ideas, the idea of a power station, how to plug in, but also to find your anchor. That's really powerful, mate. So just a little bit about his school growing up. And Lewis kept racing life quite quiet at school because it really set him apart. And he did face a bit of bullying because he's a little bit different, and he actually took up karate to deal with it. And although the stories are that he was a black belt, he never actually made it to black belt, he says, but he likes that reputation to hold. And yet through it all, he really kind of protected his passion. He wasn't going to let the bullies take that away. Later on, he went to a Cambridge school and he really found his footing. There was a lot smaller classes. He felt more support in terms of being away at weekends and traveling for his racing. And he started really excelling, especially in French and Italian, while he was also simultaneously racing across Europe. So he now speaks fluent French and Italian, which is pretty impressive. And
It probably comes in pretty handy in Monte Carlo, you'd think.
yeah, yeah, not a bad skill set to have. And a random fact, he was also in the same year at school and played football in the same team as Ashley Young, who later went on to play for Aston Villa, Manchester United, currently Everton in the Premier League, as well as England.
Well, I did not know that Lewis Hamilton was that old. It feels like Ashley Young's been around forever.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's a funny one, this, Dunk. Imagine getting bullied because you're too fast or you're too good at something. I mean, it's just a real kind of jealousy. Bullies will literally find anything. But for anyone else who's listening seriously, who's felt out of place or weird, if that's the right word, or just different, good. It probably means you're onto something different. You're forging a different path. Just don't trade that for some sort of approval of people that don't really care about you anyway.
Yeah, I really like that. Lean into the weird, lean into the different. So let's dive into his racing and how did he get into racing? He says, the first time I sat in a go-kart was on holiday in Ibiza, August 1988. I was 3. They had a little electric kiddie carts and a small track, maybe 60 meters, but I loved it. I got in and straight away I knew I was going to enjoy it. After that, nobody gave it a second thought. My dad was just a railway worker and I was just a kid. We went home and I thought that was it. But my dad remembered how much we'd all enjoyed it, especially me. We thought nothing of it until a couple of years later. For my 5th birthday, I got a remote control car. I drove it up and down the hallway and outside too. I was hooked. A few months later, my dad bought me an even better 1/12 scale electric car and spent days building it from all the bits in the box after work. I loved it. I was always pestering him to recharge the batteries. Greg, what is remarkable to me is that Lewis Hamilton caught the racing bug with remote control cars. We've said it before, where you start has no bearing on where you'll end up, and he goes from remote control cars to being an F1 champion.
Yeah, and that's the truth. I had a remote control car. No one was throwing a Mercedes F1 car at me. What's interesting here is that it's not necessarily a pathway. It probably reads like a Disney movie plot. But what it reveals is that greatness doesn't often announce itself early. It shows up as curiosity, it shows up as play. And the smartest performers, or maybe even the parents of the smartest performers, they take that really seriously. They notice that as well. So, Lewis didn't fall in love with racing and the best cars on a world class racing circuit. He's fallen in love with it in a hallway with a battery powered car. And that's what makes it so powerful, because it reminds us play can be practice. And often the thing that looks like play is just greatness warming up. And then, of course, there's his dad, a railway worker by day, some sort of garage genius by night, recharging batteries, building cars from scratch, because that's just what you do. It's not just involvement, that's real investment. And here's a lesson for coaches, for parents, for mentors. You don't need those perfect conditions to start. You just need a kid with a spark and someone who's willing to protect and nurture it. It's actually, for me, a little bit reminiscent of Tony Hawk's dad in episode 33, who started to get a little bit more involved in the skateboarding scene because he saw that that's something Tony was involved in. So what's the bottom line here? You don't necessarily have to wait for talent to wear a uniform before you take it seriously. And we've said this time and time again, little by little, a little becomes a lot. Greatness doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just hums down the hallway on a fresh set of AA batteries.
I love that. That's a great line. Well, so eventually, Lewis's dad decided to take their interest in remote control cars more seriously, and they joined a local racing club through a shop called Models in Motion in Stevenage.
Models in Motion. That sounds like his dad wanted to join a very different club. Sounds purely accidental, lad.
Yeah, okay. For clarity, Models in Motion was a local racing club. They began racing every Sunday, and through the club, a 6-year-old Lewis got the opportunity to appear on BBC's Blue Peter, something I always wanted to do, Greg. I never got my Blue Peter badge, did you?
No, I never got one either. It would have been nice to be able to get it in all the museums around the country for free.
Yeah.
Got big museum goers,
Yeah, that little segment is for our British listeners. You'll know what Blue Peter is. So, going back to when I was 7, I went for my first ride in a real go-kart. My dad took me out after what we thought was a successful year in remote control car racing. We knew nothing about karting, but I had a great time, and I got the bug from that moment, and that was it, all I ever wanted to do. A few weeks later, strange things started happening in the shed at the back of our house. My dad, who used to prep my remote control cars every night, built an extension to the shed. That Christmas, I got my first go-kart and a pale blue driving suit, matching gloves, and a red Formula One helmet. The car was 10th hand, a rickety old thing, but Dad had rebuilt it, resprayed it, polished everything. So I'd fit in with the kids who had brand new gear. I was buzzing. My first run was on January 9th, just after my 8th birthday. The rest is history.
So first off, let's just appreciate how his dad goes absolutely full F1 garage in the back garden, and the kart that he's called rickety, 10th hand. But I love it that the care and attention his dad repaints it, he polishes every bolt, not necessarily because it'll make it go faster, maybe if you knock the rust off it might, but really what it's doing is helping Lewis feel like he belongs on that starting grid. It really cast my mind back to that scene in Cool Runnings where John Candy, where he's coaching the Jamaican bobsleigh team, unveils their new bobsled. It's not just a vehicle. It's that belief system. He's saying you belong here. You're worthy of this. And to be honest, that's high performance psychology in action. Confidence is context. If you feel like you're a pro, you act like a pro. His dad, he just hasn't built a cart. He's building a mindset here. So again, I mentioned it a little bit earlier. You don't need those perfect conditions to start. Just that belief that you belong. Sometimes greatness pulls up in a spray painted cart with a homemade pit crew, and turns out that's enough.
Oh man, great reference to Cool Runnings.
Cool Runnings, yeah.
Yeah, anyone under 30, you probably wouldn't understand that, but great movie.
Ashley Young would get it.
So he says, my dad would always stand on the inside of the circuit at the hairpin. He watched where the best drivers were braking and would say, you've got to brake here, at least a meter later than the others. Then he'd move another meter and say, brake here. I kept pushing, and a lot of the time I went off because it's impossible to brake that late. But he kept saying, you can do it. Eventually it worked. I could brake later than any of my competitors and still keep momentum. That became one of the keys to my success in karting. Greg, I'm sure these days they take a little more scientific approach to such decision making, but I love this from his dad. It's first principles thinking. Brake last and you'll have the most speed.
Yeah, I'd like to think that they've got more sophisticated ways to do this now with telemetry and all those measurements. But you're right, it is. It's pure first principles thinking. It's not overcomplicated. It is the later you brake, the faster you're going into the corner, and that's it. There's no data, there's no lap time analysis. Just try and find the edge, exploit it, and then keep nudging that edge until it becomes the new normal. What Lewis learns through that isn't just a driving technique. Of course, it is that, but it's also a way of thinking. It's a sort of mental model, as it were. It's experimentation. It's got trial and error. Do it right, do it wrong, recalibrate over and over and over. And I think that's the kind of mindset. Really just start simple, test it, refine it. It's the same in racing, the same in business, the same in life. And I think a good takeaway here is performance is a set of problems that are waiting to be solved. We've said that before. So the question becomes, can you get to the heart of the problem fast enough? And one of the things that we've definitely said many, many times, because it's been so relevant, is that simplicity is complexity resolved.
Yeah, I love that summary. Simplicity is complexity resolved. Just brake later.
Just brake later. You want more speed in the corner? Brake later.
So, we've talked about the great relationship he has with his dad, but of course, every relationship has its ups and downs. And he says, occasionally our relationship has been strained by the pressures of motor racing, but that is just normal. My dad has been the motivator and the strength that keeps us all going. To be a father and a manager is tricky. It's not easy balancing both of those roles. Sometimes I know I can be very cold and treat him like a manager, but then love him to bits for what he is and what he's done for me, and he's my dad. It's not straightforward. You wake up and he's the first or second person you see, and so you've got that natural bond. Then you remember he is your manager too. But it works for us, and my dad and my family have made more sacrifices than you would believe. It's a very strange relationship we have because he is so driven, he is so committed, but never ever pushy. I said I wanted to race karts, and he said, okay, if we're going to do it, then we're going to do it properly or not at all. And that was it. It was either everything or nothing. And that is still where we are today. Greg, as we've discussed with many of our male performer stories, their relationship with their dad exists on this, I would say, entire spectrum from complete devotion. People like Marc Messier and Dan Carr had just phenomenal relationships with their dads, and then to the non-existent involvement and I'd say even hatred with people like Ray Lewis and Gordon Ramsay.
Yeah, Lewis doesn't just appreciate his dad here, he really is shaped by him, and that's a very specific kind of bond as he talks about. His dad's not just part of the life, it's also part of the work in his role as manager. And when love and performance start living in the same room, the lines can get very, very blurry very, very fast. And I think that's what makes this dynamic so compelling. Lewis says, quote, I love him to bits, but sometimes I'm cold, end quote. That's not dysfunction, that's just complexity. And that's what happens when someone is your biggest fan and also your biggest force of accountability. There is an insight here. This kind of relationship, when it holds, can produce something really rare and something really special. A partnership that's strong enough to sort of transcend both love and legacy, as it were. And that tension didn't break them. If anything, it forged them and brought them closer together. So as we say in high performance circles, excellence is the capacity to take pain. I'll do a Duncan Simpson here. I'll say it again. Excellence is the capacity to take pain. So sometimes that includes emotional pain, but if the bond is real and if that trust holds, that really becomes an engine that powers the machine forward.
Yeah, just an excellent breakdown of their relationship. So Lewis began competing in karting events across the UK nearly every weekend, and often the family in his dad's red Vauxhall Cavalier, towing a small trailer, packed up the gear in his car, and he entered his first British Cadet Car Championship at the age of 9, and by 10, things became more serious when he won the title in 1995. So a little bit about this time of his life, and he says, it was hard for any family who have to find the money to race, particularly so in the case of my parents who just had normal day jobs. For those first 3 or 4 years before we had the backing of McLaren, it was probably a lot more of a strain for my family than it was for me, and especially for my dad. For me, it was just get in the camper, go to the racetrack, sign on, do my driver's briefing, and then go and race. And that felt natural. We didn't always win, it was tough, and I'd get grumpy like a spoiled kid. I just did not like to lose, but neither did my dad. From these early days, my dad had been my manager, with Linda in full support. It was really a family team, Nick included. So, Greg, we've talked about it before about the difference between sacrifice and investment. And I think his dad is definitely seeing it as investing rather than sacrificing. At the same time, kids pick up on things like we don't have a lot of money, and it's quite easy to internalize such things, which create pressure.
Yeah, you've nailed it there. It's the difference between that sacrifice and investment that we have talked about. Sacrifice tends to be sort of rear facing and look back, look at what I give up. But investment tends to project forward, look at what this could become. His dad clearly framed this whole journey as an investment, and he didn't just want Lewis to race, he was all in. Worked multiple jobs, rebuilt the karts, towed gears to the track, not because he was chasing a dream for Lewis, but because he was building one with him. So I think a key here, and I think what his dad did brilliantly, was making the process feel normal even when it wasn't.
And the reality is that there's no way his dad could have known what Lewis would become in terms of a 7-time F1 champion. And I don't think that was the start. It was, hey, my kid's got an interest here, and I'm just gonna go all in, and I'm gonna support him, and we'll see where it goes. So talk about investing. By listening to this podcast, you're investing some valuable time yourself to learn from history's greatest performers. So if you found value in what we're sharing and want us to keep going, please support the show by clicking the donate link in the show notes below. Every bit helps. See that little plug there, Greg?
I did. I know you're trying to embezzle this money to build a bigger shed, just like Hamilton's dad did.
Yeah, a bigger shed for my boat in Florida.
Yeah, exactly.
So in 1998, Lewis joins McLaren Mercedes Young Driver Support Program, which was a major step forward. It brought that kind of crucial financial support to the family. He later teamed up with Nico Rosberg in the karting team called MBM, which was created by Nico's father, Kiki Rosberg, who was a world champion. In 2000, they had an outstanding season, winning nearly every major race in their class, including the European Championships and World Cup in Japan. In 2001, Lewis transitioned to single-seat racing, competing in the British Formula Renault Series with Manor Motorsport. So a little bit about this transition, he says, in karting, I was a king, but now in single-seaters, I was back to basics. It was so aggressive on that first lap. It was unreal, and I was like, shoot, I'm going to have to pull my finger out. It was not like karting where you could just roll around the paddock and have some fun, get in the car and drive. You have to be there, paying attention to all the data, working with the engineers and all that stuff. In 2003, I had a slow start before something just clicked, and then I just blew everyone away. I won 10 races out of 15 that season. I came second in 2 of them and third in 1, and because of that, I won the championship. I did not have to race the last 2 races. So we're going to jump ahead a little bit, Greg. The book walks through every step of his rise, but to keep it moving, by 2005, Lewis and McLaren had hit a bit of a crossroads. He wanted to step up to GP2. They weren't convinced. So they parted ways, and for a moment, he was actually without a contract and without any backing, and was really feeling the pressure to prove he wasn't just a McLaren-made talent. He eventually returned. He won the GP2 series, and as such, he earned a test and then a seat for the 2007 F1 season. But before that, Greg, I think this is amazing. Let's rewind 11 years to 1995. A 10-year-old Lewis Hamilton walks up to Ron Dennis at the Autosports Awards. So this is a little bit of a story. He says, eventually that night, my dad said, there's Ron Dennis. Go and get his autograph. I walked up to him, nervous but confident. I said, hello, I'm Lewis Hamilton. One day I'd like to be a racing driver and I'd like to race for McLaren. Ron sat down and spoke to me for what felt like ages. He looked at me in the eyes and said, you have got to work hard at school. Keep that spirit and keep going. I asked him to sign my autograph book and then said, can you also put down your phone number and address, please? He said, okay, and he wrote it down. Then he added, call me in 9 years and I'll sort out a deal. I thought that was a really cool story. And for context, Ron Dennis at the time was the principal, like the team lead at McLaren.
That's very, very cool. But it is also a reminder sometimes the most powerful things start with a quiet ask and not a big announcement.
Yeah, he just had the stones to walk up and ask Ron Dennis to, sign his autograph book. So back to F1, he says, I was so determined to succeed. I was ready to do anything it took. I knew I was young and I was a rookie, but I am very straightforward and I say what's on my mind. I will not try and be someone I'm not. I will just tell it as I see it or understand it. After my first few tests with the McLaren Formula One car, I was completely comfortable putting in respectable lap times. I think it impressed a few people that I was consistently getting on with my job. I knew then that anything is possible. I was saying, we can actually win a race if we work hard enough. That is when my road to Formula One really began. When I was first given the job, my race engineer, Phil Prue, was a bit disappointed that he did not get to work on Fernando's car. He was, after all, the double world champion. I said, I'm sorry that you didn't get Fernando, but I'll do the best job I can. And all the credit to Phil. He was great about it and relished the challenge of working with a rookie. He said, don't worry, we'll work hard and we'll do fine. I've heard people say that some drivers used to just walk into the paddock and race and then leave without a word. I wanted to make sure I was not like that. I made it clear I was willing to work twice the hours, never mind the same hours, as anyone on the team. I was asking, are you willing to work the amount of hours I'm willing to work? I am easy to talk to and that is important. I believe you have to communicate with your team and the people around you in as normal a manner as possible. The McLaren and Mercedes-Benz staff are some of the most intelligent, hard-working and loyal people I have ever met. We all have different jobs, but our goal is the same. We are a team and their support has been incredible.
Duncan, you mentioned earlier that Lewis was a black belt, but this is absolute white belt mentality at its best. He doesn't just rock up thinking, I'm lucky to be here. He's thinking, I'm ready to belong and I'm going to earn it. I think two things really jump out here. One, he's not afraid to work twice the hours, and that's not bravado. That's belief in and commitment to the process. I think two, he refuses to shapeshift and fit the room. He is himself, fully authentic. And that kind of authenticity, I think, really is a performance edge, because when you combine humility with hunger, something special happens. You become coachable, but not necessarily compliant. You're confident, but you're not necessarily complacent. And that's how rookies become game changers, not by blending in, but by showing up and building trust through effort.
Yeah, and a bit about his effort and his preparation, he says. So, for the first 6 months leading up to my first Grand Prix in Australia, I was in the factory every day. From 8 in the morning until 6 or later in the evening, Ron and Martin had given people at McLaren the task of transforming me from a GP2 driver into a Formula 1 driver. The aim was to make sure I was ready to score podium points in Melbourne, even though that seemed ambitious at the time. I worked hard with the team, and they paid me back with enormous effort in return. I did 2 long stints of physical training, and, in between, hours with the engineers on the car. When I got home, I was finished. I went to bed at 8 o'clock, and it was like that for a whole 6 months. When the team saw that, even on bad days, they could see I was totally committed. Working as a team is critical. Sometimes you have to make your own decisions, but generally all decisions are better when team driven. If I had a problem with the car, I always came back and discussed it. I never blamed the car or the team, and it's the same with them towards me. We're all human, we all make mistakes. If I make mistakes, I apologise. I'm still learning. It's about appreciation.
Duncan, this is where you stop being a prospect and start becoming a pro. 6 months out, he's not prepping for a debut. He's conditioning that trust within his team. He's signaling to everyone around him, you can bet on me. And that's what elite performers do. They make that belief tangible and they make that belief visible to others. And of course, it's not just about the hours, but it's about the signal that you send with your energy, in your willingness to spend those hours. You show up early, you stay late. In his case, you stay very humble. That is culture setting behavior. That really is leadership without a title. Because when your team believes that you're all in, again, they don't just work for you, they work with you. That's how champions are made. They're made in the factory, not in the podium. And it's so reminiscent of that relationship that he has with his dad in his early days. He's working with his dad, not for his dad.
Yeah, I love that. And he's really showing great leadership skills at quite a young age. And he says, during my training and development, I visited all the different departments and engineers, both at McLaren in Woking and the Mercedes-Benz in Brixworth, England and Stuttgart, Germany, so I could learn about the brakes, the suspension, the rear suspension geometry, disc control settings, gear ratios, pit stop strategies, the controls, the dashboard, the launch procedure, the default procedures when you're out on the track. I had to take in all these different things. I had to understand them all and the details and exactly how it all worked and know them backwards. I took that opportunity with both hands and maximised my potential. I didn't just turn up in a daze. I went home and I studied. All the sheets of paper, the booklets that they gave me, I read and I made sure I understood. I had never done anything like that before, but I did it then. So it was not about being programmed. I was given an opportunity to learn and I took it. I applied myself better than I have ever applied myself. And that is why, when I got my first Grand Prix, I was ready.
That sounds very much like your experience with Volvo. You were learning about brakes, suspension, rear suspension, geometry, gear ratios.
I hope Volvo's not listening. I've had a nightmare with my Volvo.
Yeah, yeah. Well, if they are, they can come and sponsor us, or at least fling some money. So, I think this is fantastic. I love the fact that he's becoming a student, and he isn't just preparing to drive the car. He really wants to understand the car and understand how and why it works. He's not just settling for talent. He's gone really, really deep here. That geometry, driver controls, pit stop systems, launch sequences, all of that. It's not just a case of, right, plonk me in the car, I'm going to show up and drive. It really is a dedication to the craft here to understand everything. And he's clearly teaching F1 like a language. And the best way to become fluent is to fully immerse yourself in that language. And it sounds very much like he's doing this even before he lines up on the grid. And that's a really strong lesson here. Preparation isn't just physical, it's technical, it's somewhat intellectual, and it's definitely mental. He doesn't want to be taught, or he certainly doesn't wait to be taught. He's gone and grabbed it and he's studied. He's immersed himself in that culture and in that information. And that's what separates those that want to compete from those people that want to master.
And of course, as we've kind of alluded to, there's levels, right? So he started with remote control cars and he's gone up to karting and then GP2 and then Formula One. And at every stage, of course, it's more complex. Of course, it's more detailed. And of course, you have to put in a ton of time to prepare. So his first Grand Prix, which was in Australia, March 18th, 2007, he says, Saturday, I went into my first Formula One qualifying session and ended up fourth on the grid, P4 for my first Grand Prix start. I was overwhelmed and enjoying every moment, but a little part of me was disappointed I hadn't outqualified Fernando, even if he was a world champion. I always wanted to come out on top if I can, and I think that's natural for any racing driver. I don't know how many laps I led for, but it was a few, and right then I knew I was meant to be in Formula One. I could feel it. I was gutted I didn't beat Fernando, but he's a great driver and a double world champion, and I have to give him credit. Still, I felt so much satisfaction finishing third in my first Grand Prix. Stepping onto the podium almost felt like winning. It was emotional thinking about the past 6 months, what my family had done, and how much work we'd all put in. Then other thoughts started creeping in. Is this a one-off? How do I maintain it? But mostly I felt great and thought, I've done my parents proud. I knew after that things would change. Everyone would know who I was. It made things harder. I had earned respect, but I wasn't out there to earn respect. I was out there to win. The result was a turning point for me, especially when I look back at it now.
Duncan, that's such a big moment, not purely because of the result, but because of the realization. I mean, a podium on your first Grand Prix, that's pretty special. But the way that he processes it, that's next level, I think. He's already zooming out big picture. What does this mean? Can I sustain it? Will this be my sort of standard going forward at just a moment in time? And that really is high performance awareness in real time. And I love that there's a little bit of a tension here, right? There's pride, but there's also pressure. There's clarity in the moment, but there's also the doubt of, can you repeat that moment? And it's all showing up at once. And that's the exact blend that makes an athlete dangerous, because now he's not chasing validation of other people. He's chasing more and more. That race, I think, really, it announced Lewis Hamilton to the world and told the world that he belonged there. More importantly, it told him that. And once you know that for yourself, the game really does change.
And you mentioned, to finish third in your first Grand Prix is pretty remarkable. And then he finishes second in his second Grand Prix in Malaysia. And he says, those early results, third in Australia and second in Malaysia, gave me a real confidence boost. There was talk about going one step higher. And sure, I wanted that. But it's always dangerous to make predictions. I'd learned that from experience. Whenever I moved up to a new category, I usually managed to challenge at the front. That's down to having a good team and a competitive car. I always felt I had the respect of other drivers, even in Formula One, though I was still new and learning my way around. I hadn't raced much against most of them, so it's hard to know how far they'd go in certain situations. I just tried to respect them and hope for the same in return. The media spotlight really turned on me. There were a lot of questions about pressure, expectations, all of it. But honestly, it felt natural. I'd worked for 13 years to get here, and I just wanted to keep enjoying it by performing as well as I could.
Duncan, this is that classic early career pivot from I'm just happy to be here to people are really already expecting something now. Third in Australia, second in Malaysia. Again, that's wild. The trajectory is obvious. Everyone's asking, okay, when's he going to get this first win? But he doesn't necessarily try and force that narrative. He just keeps showing up, keeps doing the work, respecting the craft, sort of rinse and repeat, and he earns that respect in return. And that's how you build momentum that starts to last.
So, of course, his life changes in a pretty short space of time. And he says, in the space of 6 weeks, my life had changed. I was a prisoner in my own home, all because I was leading the Formula One Drivers' Championship. I'd finished third, second, then second again, and I felt great. But when I got back to the UK and went to my parents' house, there were reporters and photographers camped outside. At one point, 10 cars parked out front. My dad warned me about paparazzi using long lenses to get pictures. I had to keep a low profile. Suddenly, I couldn't just be normal anymore. I'd been away for 2 months and had no idea what had been going on back home. At the petrol station, people were coming up to me like, "Hey Lewis, well done and good luck." It was a strange feeling. Complete strangers knew who I was and were following everything I did on TV and in the papers. Greg, this is fascinating. In 6 weeks, Lewis goes from being relatively unknown to being the most talked about rookie in Formula One. How do you coach someone through this kind of sudden visibility without losing who they are?
Do you think he comes screeching into petrol stations and just yells now and expects to get out of there in like 6 seconds?
Now, now, now.
So that sudden visibility you were talking about there, yeah, there is a collision point here between sort of your performance identity, who you are when you pull that helmet on, and your public identity. You know, the one you build, the other one kind of gets built for you. What stands out here is how fast the shift is between the two. And if you're not careful, that external recognition can start to really sort of distort your internal compass. And we've seen that with numerous performers that we've talked about in the past. You do need a boundary between who you are and what you're known for. And that's where Lewis leans on his family and his routine and staying close to home. Again, those things that anchor you. It's not just comfort, it's a strategy. It helps you to keep your identity rooted in reality, not the reaction of other people around you. Because if you don't define yourself, the spotlight and other people will do that for you.
So, a little bit about his teammate, Fernando Alonso, who is a two-time world champion. And he says, Fernando, I'm sure, didn't like me doing so well and getting attention so early. That's only natural. I'd probably feel the same. He kept to himself and so did I. Ron kept asking me to help Fernando feel welcome. I tried, especially when he joined the team, but he never really spoke to me. I liked and admired Fernando, so I was disappointed our relationship didn't improve, but it wasn't for lack of trying. So, Greg, for a bit of backstory here about their relationship, in January 2007, McLaren organised a team building fitness week in Finland. The whole team went, all the team mechanics and the engineers, and Fernando didn't attend, chose not to show up.
Finland in January, I can probably understand why.
Yeah, maybe it was more saunas than anything.
Yeah.
Lewis felt that experience really helped him kind of build respect and bond with the team, but of course Fernando Alonso wasn't there. So that's a little bit of context. In his first 4 races, he went third in Australia, second in Malaysia, second in Bahrain, and second in Spain. However, in race 5 in Monaco, the team actually tell Lewis to back off and let Alonso win, and this is Lewis's reaction. Now, keep in mind, Alonso is a two-time world champion and the reigning world champion at the time. Lewis says, "What do you mean keep it to 5 seconds? I want to win this race. It's not over till I see the flag." They said, "Turn it down, keep the gap." That's when I realized Fernando was going to win. But I thought, I'm going to make sure people know I've got the pace. So I stuck behind him. After the race, the team weren't happy. But I said, I'm not here to finish second. I felt I had the pace to win Monaco. In the end, I understood the decision. Better to finish than risk hitting barriers. But it affected me. I've never been told to hold back before. I was leading the World Championship and I was driving to win. If I was quicker, I was quicker. If I wasn't, fine. But in Monaco, I knew I was quicker. Greg, we've got a rookie outperforming expectations, a reigning world champion feeling the heat, and a team trying to manage egos and outcomes. How do you handle that tension if you were in charge?
If I'm in charge, well, that's a dangerous game to play. But let's give it a go. Probably first move, I'd get everyone in a room quick as possible. Acknowledge there's some heat and there's some tension there. The rookie's on fire. The champion's feeling the pressure. That's real and it's fine. But we set the rules and the boundaries early. We're driven by our clear values, clear communication, clear standards. We're going to compete hard, respect hard. No politics, no whispers, no backbite. And you've got a problem, you say it in the garage, and certainly not in the press. And monitor energy, not just the lap times. Tension's fine, no problem with tension. But toxicity, that's not a good thing. In F1, culture cracks, they show up before car issues, and I think people see this even more in the Drive to Survive series. They see the tension that exists between drivers. But the way that you protect the team is by managing the room and the people in the room, not just the race itself.
So up to the next race, which was Canada, and he says, I just won the Canadian Grand Prix. My dad stood there in the crowd. Even from the podium, I could see a tear in his eye. There was no one else I'd dedicate that win to. We were a team, from karts to Formula One. Without him, none of this would have been possible. I'd been on the podium 5 times. I knew the win was coming. It was just a matter of when. And now it had happened. It was a huge step forward for me and a signal to the team we could win races with me, not just Fernando. That was a breakthrough for all of us. Greg, beyond the champagne, what really shifted for Lewis after this first win?
It's inevitable that something did shift because it wasn't just a race win. Again, it's a validation moment for Lewis, certainly for his dad, for everyone who'd been grinding since those early karting days. You can almost hear the unspoken kind of, we're not crazy to have believed that this was going to happen. What's powerful here is that it's not just personal. That win tells the team this is a rookie. He's not just here for experience. He is here to deliver. And every performer needs that breakthrough, that validation that comes with it, the one that shifts you from potential to proof.
So, someone is feeling the heat, and at the next race, which was in Indianapolis, at a press conference, Fernando Alonso publicly suggests that the team are giving Lewis preferential treatment. Lewis found the comment surprising, especially given the events at Monaco, and believed the team had treated both drivers equally and fairly up to this point. So a little bit about that, and he says, I doubt very much that Fernando expected me to do as well as I did. Coming into the team as a 2-time world champion, he had not really been challenged too closely before. I do not believe he expected a rookie to challenge him so strongly, let alone beat him, but it was just racing. I was just there doing my best, and I was, as they often said, very much living the dream. Certain things that came with my success were even surprising to me. So, Greg, when a rookie outperforms expectations, especially in a sport like F1, it can unsettle even seasoned pros. And in this case, Alonso is starting to throw a bit of shade in the press. So what's the lesson here when success becomes a bit of a source of tension?
Mm-hmm. It's a classic case of someone seeing the glory without necessarily knowing the story. Lewis certainly wasn't being favoured. He was just outperforming. And that's uncomfortable if you've built your identity on being that guy and being that number one. From a performance psych lens, this is where we see that humility getting disrupted a little bit. A rookie doing the work, that can very easily expose veterans coasting on reputation. When that happens, insecurity often shows up in the form of blame. You've used the term lions don't die of old age, they die in the jaws of younger lions, and that's maybe what we're seeing here. So what's the takeaway? Don't assume that success is going to make everyone clap. Sometimes your performance is actually a threat to other people and the story that those other people are telling themselves. So if you just stay focused on the hard work, the scoreboard begins to speak louder than any voice in a press conference.
Yeah, I love that line you just said. Sometimes your performance threatens the story others are telling themselves. That's great. So, on to race 9, which is his home race at Silverstone in the UK. And he says, when I came back to Europe after those wonderful weeks in North America, my life was totally flipped upside down. I was on a completely different planet. All the attention was something really new to me. From being virtually unknown at the start of the year, I'd become someone everyone recognized. People wanted to know about me, not just my views on racing, but on girls, music, religion, and anything else they thought about.
It's really hard to fathom, isn't it? 6 months ago, he's chasing apexes in obscurity. Now he's dodging paparazzis at petrol stations.
That's great alliteration there,
Yeah,
Greg.
thank you very much.
And he says, That Saturday at Silverstone was one of my best memories of the year. I was just faster than Kimi, and Fernando was third. On that final qualifying lap, you're on a knife edge. One mistake and it's gone. But somehow, I put it all together. It felt phenomenal. The crowd was incredible. I felt a real energy boost that day. It definitely helped. But the race itself was tough. But the support carried me through. There were a lot of distractions. There were celebrities on the grid. The whole show. But I stuck to my routine. Before the race, I lay still in my room, bringing my heart rate down. Once on the grid, I get out of the car. It's too comfortable in there. You can shut off completely. I stay moving, keep alert. It's how I stay sharp. So, Greg, Silverstone was madness. There was a home crowd. The Beckhams were on the grid. All eyes were on Lewis. How do elite performers stay calm in chaos?
They have to be able to separate the signal from the noise. So the signal is what's important, the noise is the stuff that isn't. And they don't let the noise run the show. They run their system, their process. So what you see in Lewis here is just insulation of performance. He creates that little bubble. He's got his routines, his rituals, things he does for his regulation, whether that's, energy management, regulating his effort, that pre-race quiet time. That's not passive. That's how you really dial in that precision. Because if you don't manage your state, the moment is going to manage it for you. And on the grid, when it's just absolute pandemonium, when everyone else is starstruck or scattered, it's a great opportunity for Lewis to get locked in. So the takeaway here, energy is a currency. You've got to spend it wisely.
I love that. So, just to reflect and to kind of keep us on task, in his first 9 races in Formula One, Lewis Hamilton hasn't finished worse than third while also winning in Canada and the US.
Sounds like my boxing record. Never finished worse than third.
So he says, after 9 consecutive podium finishes, leading the World Championship and suddenly being praised everywhere, I was experiencing life as I'd never done before. It was all new, every day really. I was still enjoying everything, but I was aware that it was getting harder and harder to maintain my performance levels and my consistency. In the first few races, I just went out and pushed it to the limit. But as the season went on, the expectations changed and I felt a different kind of responsibility for the points I was aiming to win for myself and the team. So Greg, Hamilton talks about a shift here from almost chasing to defending. Early in the season, it's about showing what he can do, and now he's trying to manage the pressure, the expectations, and he's actually holding on to a lead. What changes for a performer when they move from being the hunter to being hunted?
I think everything changes when you're chasing that pressure that you feel is it's external, it's prove yourself, make your mark. But when you're leading and you've got other people chasing you, that pressure becomes internal. Don't mess it up. Don't let this go. You stop sort of running towards something and you start running away from that failure. It's really important here to reframe the situation. Instead of trying to protect the lead, elite performers learn to compete from the front and race from the front in this case. And they keep that sort of, you mentioned hunter there, it's a real hunter's mindset even when they are being hunted. And that's a really tough transition to make, particularly during performance. Don't play not to lose, play to win, even when you're winning.
So everything's going really well. Obviously, we just talked about the first 9 races, but we know F1 is dangerous. And at the Nürburgring in Germany, during qualifying, he has a really bad crash, and it's his first bad one in F1. And he says, I damaged all the top muscles of my chest, and I ruptured one of the ligaments in between my ribs. I thought I had broken my right leg and had broken a rib because of the pain. But eventually I calmed down and I thought, let's get out of here. I pulled myself out of the car and tried walking, but my right leg hurt so much that I fell onto the ground. It must have been all the adrenaline and everything else that kept me going through until that point. Then the medical team came and took control. We've talked about the ability to handle physical pain, especially with some of our endurance athletes. We've covered Chrissy Wellington and Lance Armstrong, as well as some of our combat sport athletes like Sugar Ray Leonard. So, Greg, try and paint a picture for the listeners regarding the psychological side of pain, especially driving an F1 car with a damaged chest muscle and ruptured rib ligaments.
Believe it or not, I'm not going to speak from experience here. To any of those things. I can tell you what it's like to drive a Ford Fusion with a bad back. But yeah, it sort of gives you chills, this, because you realize the knife edge that they do actually live on. The pain in sport isn't just physical. It comes with other baggage. It's cognitive and it's emotional. And driving an F1 car with a torn up chest and a rib injury, I mean, that's not just pain management. The amount of force it takes to do anything in an F1 car is ridiculous. So it's almost compartmentalizing that pain, being able to put it one side. You're strapped in tight, you're pulling wild G forces every time you take a corner. Your core's constantly being braced and under stress. Every breath is just, I mean, it's just a negotiation with your body at this point. And yet Lewis Hamilton's able to race. He didn't withdraw. He competed while he's feeling all of these things. And this is where mindset can become your strongest muscle. You can't make the pain go away. I mean, that's impossible. But you can decide what it means. And you can shrink your world to the next corner, the next braking zone. You know, in psychology, we talk about the idea of pain acceptance, not giving in, but letting go of the fight against it, kind of surrendering to it, as it were. And that frees up bandwidth to focus. And that's what really separates the high performers from the rest in these moments. They don't pretend that the pain isn't there. That would just be ridiculous. They accept it and they sort of make peace with it and they work alongside that pain.
That's a really great breakdown. I know we've talked about pain, like I said, with some of our endurance athletes and some of our combat sport athletes, and it just is a really important theme in some of our athletes' high performance journeys. So, despite a lot of pain, he did race on Sunday, and he still finished a respectable ninth. Of course, where he started on the grid was a little ways back. So, jumping back to his teammate, or so-called teammate, Fernando Alonso, he says, "It was great to work alongside a champion like Fernando in my first year. I learned a lot from him. We shared data and it showed me where I was losing time and could improve. Being his teammate was a huge motivation. All my former teammates were competitive and that's a thrill. Figuring out how far you need to push yourself to beat someone that good. In our sport, your first rival is your teammate. As a rookie up against a two-time world champion, I needed to find every edge I could." So, Greg, Lewis is balancing two things here. He's learning from Alonso while also trying to beat him. What's your take on competing with someone you're supposed to be collaborating with?
Yeah, this is a sort of a paradox of elite teams. Of course, you're teammates, but you're not necessarily equals, particularly when you've got something like F1 where the stopwatch is the judge and jury. What Lewis really nails here is that, you know, we talked about it earlier, performance is a set of problems waiting to be solved. And that first problem always is the one right next to you in the garage. So he's not just learning from Alonso, there's a ton to learn there. He's learning how to beat him as well. And that takes, again, humility and hunger, which he has in spades. But you've got to be humble enough to study the data, to study the gap, but also be hungry enough to close that gap. And here's a maxim that fits. The man on top of the mountain didn't just fall there. Lewis knew that he's climbing against someone who's already at the summit and has been to the summit more than one time. And that kind of internal rivalry, if it's handled right, that's jet fuel. And it's a great reminder for us all. Compete with respect, learn with the right amount of obsession, and measure progress by proximity to excellence.
Well, Lewis definitely learned from Alonso, but tensions between the two of them boiled over at the 2007 Hungarian Grand Prix. Lewis refused to yield in qualifying. Alonso retaliated by blocking his final lap in the pit lane, and the stewards weren't having it. Alonso was hit with a grid penalty, and McLaren lost constructors' points. Lewis went on to win the race, but this was really the start of where their relationship broke down. But the real story here wasn't just about pole position, it was about power and pressure. And really, this partnership starting to crack under the spotlight. And he says, that weekend sorted a few things out in a strange way. When two of the most competitive people are in the same team, both wanting to win, it puts the whole system under pressure. Sometimes I felt Fernando was favoured, and I'm sure he felt the same about me. I didn't want to fall out with him. I tried to connect, but if he didn't want a decent working relationship, that was his choice. We were in Turkey again, staying at the same hotel where we first met. We met in his room and I told him, I've got a lot of respect for you. I want to beat you, but that doesn't change how I feel. He said the same. We shook hands. Things felt better, but not much changed beneath the surface. Ron kept encouraging me to make Fernando feel welcomed. I tried, but eventually I told him, I've done my part. I'm not going to defocus myself to make him happy. I'm going to focus on my dream. At Spa, he ran me wide on turn one. From then on, I knew anything could happen. I decided I could be just as aggressive, but without taking unnecessary risks. It was a pity things came to that. I found it hard to understand. So, Greg, there's something so rich and so human about this section. Two of the best drivers in the world, they're both feeling like the other is the team's favorite. They're holding respect, but they're unwilling to really fully connect. And I'm wondering, how should high performers manage this kind of emotional friction when their greatest rival is across the hall?
Well, that is a tough question. When your teammate is your benchmark, but also your biggest threat, that's a really tough place to exist. A bit of a paradox. And when the stakes are high, the garage becomes, where they live and where they work. It becomes a crucible, a proving ground, but also a chessboard. There's a lot of strategy there. Listen, when performance environments magnify everything, ambition, insecurity, validation, I think what Lewis has done here was incredibly mature. He's addressed the tension, he's tried to clear the air, and then he's come to the understanding that not everything's going to be fixed here. And that's huge because in elite teams, you don't have to be best friends, but you do need clarity, emotional clarity, role clarity, mission clarity. And there's a great line I'll bring in here, and that's fight the war that you're in, not the war you wish you were in. Lewis wasn't trying to win Fernando over anymore. He's just refocusing on winning races. He says he doesn't want to defocus on other things. Don't waste your energy on proving or pleasing or peacemaking if it costs you focus. And Lewis is doubling down on this.
After an extraordinary rookie season marked by 4 wins, consistent podiums, and this high profile tension within McLaren, Lewis Hamilton arrives at the final race of 2007 in Brazil, and he is the points leader going into this final race. So heading into Sao Paulo, he has a slender lead over his teammate Fernando Alonso, but also Ferrari's Kimi Raikkonen. Hamilton had 107 points, Alonso trailed just behind on 103, and Raikkonen sat third with 100. With just 7 points separating the top three, the title was really still wide open. And the pressure on the 22-year-old rookie couldn't have been higher. And he says, I was in my room just now, looking out the window and thinking, wow, last year I was GP2 champion and I was hoping I would be in Formula One this year. I remember discussing with McLaren the possibility of me doing this race last year, and now I am here. I am experienced. I have been competitive all year and leading the championship. It felt crazy. I cannot believe it. I was simply stunned. That was pretty much how I felt. I'm only 22 and I was there talking about racing for the World Championship in Brazil. So, Greg, this is wild. 1 year ago, Hamilton's watching this race thinking maybe someday, and now he's leading the World Championship, headed into the final round at just 22. I mean, that's a fast climb. Like, how does someone mentally hold on to that kind of rise without falling off the edge?
It is a fast climb, and this is where the altitude of success meets the thin air of pressure.
Ooh, I love that. The altitude of success meets the thin air of pressure. You've had some fantastic one-liners tonight.
But think about it. Lewis, he hasn't just climbed fast here, he's also climbed publicly. Every podium, every press conference, every point he makes, that's under the microscope. And now he's got the whole sport holding its breath. What I love is that quote from him where he says, I'm stunned. Not in a sort of a frozen way, but in a bit of an awestruck way. And I think that's really healthy. That's humility doing its job. Humility is the truest form of clarity here. So if you're a high performer listening to this, take note. You don't have to feel ready to be ready. What matters is your preparation, not perfect confidence, not perfect circumstances. And I think one more thing here, Lewis isn't pretending it's not a big deal. He's acknowledging it and then he's choosing to just keep going on anyway. And that's what elite performers do. They breathe the pressure in and they just exhale that performance.
So, big exhale from me. However, this wasn't a storybook ending for Lewis Hamilton. Unfortunately, he has gearbox issues early in the race, which caused him to drop way down to 18th place.
This wasn't after Alonso was hanging around his car in the garage by any chance. It feels very real Lewis there, where everyone was blowing out knees at the crucial moment.
Yeah, Alonso might have snipped a few wires, I think. So he drops to 18th place despite recovering to finish 7th. It wasn't quite enough to secure the championship. Kimi Raikkonen wins the race and his teammate Felipe Massa comes second. Alonso is third. The result allows Kimi Raikkonen to clinch the world championship by a single point over both Hamilton and Alonso. And I think, and I'm not a complete F1 aficionado, it's one of the closest seasons of all time in terms of the championship. And he says, in the end, he finished with 110 points to be champion, and I had 109. the same as Fernando. But I was runner-up in the championship because although Fernando and I had scored 4 wins each, I had scored more second places. I wouldn't say I was gutted. I felt the same as I did at the start of the race, relaxed. At the garage, we were all disappointed. But this is racing. The team did a phenomenal job, and I said that to everyone. Then I went and gave Linda a hug, and she said she was so proud of me. And I saw Nick. He was so very strong and supportive of me. Ron said he was sorry. I said to him, Ron, thank you for an amazing year, and thanks for the opportunity you gave me, and for sticking by me for all this time, and we'll do it again next year. To finish second at the end of my first season as a rookie in Formula One was certainly no failure, but I could not deny I felt a sense of disappointment to have gone so close to taking the title. I was 4 points ahead at the start of the day and suffered mechanical problems and bad luck at the wrong time. It was not a sweet moment, but I can take the positives from it and look ahead to 2008. And that is where we'll leave it. Greg, what are your top 10 life lessons from My Story by Lewis Hamilton?
Absolutely. Let's race into some of the positives here. Number one. Ooh, why are you not having that? That's perfectly acceptable with this standard of podcast. Right, back to it. Number one. Chase mastery, not fame. Success comes from relentless focus, not chasing headlines. I'm not out there to earn respect. I am out there to win. Number two. Keep your inner circle tight. Family is your foundation, especially in high-pressure environments. Lewis says, keep your family as close as possible. These are the things I believe in, and they've done me well. Number three, pressure is a privilege. Expectation is part of greatness. Learn to carry it. He says, I was under immense pressure, but I delivered. I knew I could do it. Number four, turn pain into fuel. Channel emotional and physical pain into competitive energy. Number five, preparation beats perception. Talent gets attention, but preparation earns results. He says, I studied everything they gave me. I applied myself better than ever before. Number six, communicate like a champion. Strong teams are built on clear, humble communication. Lewis says, I believe you have to communicate in as normal a manner as possible. Number seven, stay grounded in gratitude. Success is fleeting. Stay humble, stay hungry. He says, I always try to remember to appreciate the opportunity I've been given. Number eight, own your identity. Never compromise who you are to fit into a system. He says, I'll not try to be someone I'm not. I'll just tell it as I see it. Number nine, be your brother's keeper. Draw strength from the people who inspire you the most. He talks about his brother. Nick is my inspiration, and that helps me a lot. Number 10, bet on yourself. Believe in your readiness, even before other people do. He says, I kept telling Ron and Martin, next year, I'm going to be ready for Formula One. I promise.
Greg, as always, a fantastic top 10, but what are your top 10 behaviours to avoid from My Story by Lewis Hamilton?
Absolutely. Gentlemen, start your engines for your top 10 behaviours to avoid. And ladies.
Bad jokes, bad jokes.
Bad jokes. We're chock full of them. Number one, letting fame distract you. Public praise means nothing if you lose your edge. He says, I wasn't going out there to earn respect. I was out there to win. Number two, taking family support for granted. Every champion stands on the shoulders of sacrifice. He says, without my dad, none of this would have happened at all. Number three, playing small to keep others comfortable. Don't dim your light for anyone, not even teammates. He says, I knew I was quicker. I'm not here to finish second. Talking about his teammate, Fernando Alonso. Number four, wasting energy on negativity. Focus is finite. Protect your mental fuel. He says, it's too easy to be sucked into things and just find you are drained by it all. Number five, coasting on talent. Talent without obsession doesn't win titles. You have to work hard at school, keep that spirit, and keep going. That came from Ron Dennis, McLaren team principal. Number six, ignoring the team behind you. No one wins alone, not even in a solo sport. He says, we're a team and their support has been incredible. Number seven, avoiding honest conversation. Great teammates and leaders confront friction. He says, I don't have any issues with you. I want to beat you, but I still respect you. Again, talking about his teammate and competitor, Fernando Alonso. Number eight, getting comfortable too soon. Success early can breed complacency. Stay sharp. He says, how do I maintain this? Is this a one-off? Number nine, letting others define your path. Be ready to make bold decisions when it matters most. He says, McLaren had other plans, so we came out of contract. And finally, number 10, thinking the work ever ends. The podium is a checkpoint, not a finish line. He says, we'll do it next year. Thank you so much for joining myself and Duncan on this episode of Performers. If you found value in today's show, share it with someone who needs the inspiration and consider supporting us via the link in the show notes. We'll see you next time, where we'll continue to decode the minds of the world's most elite performers.